Good morning. As you just heard, I'm Susan Karamanian, the Dean of the College of Law at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Over the past day, we have learned a lot about disinformation, whether that disinformation be state-sponsored, done by private actors at the behest of a state, or done by private actors acting in their own capacity. The perpetrator's intention could be malicious, specifically seeking to cause disruption, such as a war, or it could be simply negligent, an online reader absorbed by a piece of false information and then passing that information on without thinking of the consequences, without engaging in any due diligence. We've heard how these developments are not new, as disinformation is at least as old as the nation state, and we even heard this morning it goes back to the Roman Empire. We've learned how the internet enables anyone to be engaged in disinformation or to be affected by it, and to do so with ease. We heard today about fake people, and we heard that we are in a difficult time determining what is right or what is wrong. It is within this context that we will have a distinguished panel that will be looking at the war of words, disinformation, and I would say disinformation and challenges associated in dealing with it. We're very honored to have with us today an individual who dealt specifically with the aftermath of the hacking of the Qatar news agency, in which false information, false statements deliberately put in the public realm attributed to the Emir of Qatar were aimed specifically at damaging the state of Qatar. This would fall into the category of state acts deliberately aimed at provoking, harming another state. Please welcome Sheikh Saif bin Ahmed Thani, Director of the Government Communication Office, who has dealt extensively with the aftermath of the attack on the Qatar News Agency. Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. We also welcome my colleague from the Hamad bin Khalifa University, Dr. Ahmed Elmagarmid, Executive Director of HBKU's Qatar Computing Research Institute. Dr. Ahmed and QCRI have been involved in an extensive analysis in the aftermath of the attack, and he's here today to share the information that he and his colleagues have unveiled, specifically with regard to information about preparation of the attack, the deliberate efforts that were made, and the consequences, and the means by which they were able to gather this important information. He joins colleagues at Hamad bin Khalifa University in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, as well as in our College of Science and Engineering that have studied these issues extensively. Our third speaker is Carlo Nardi. Colonel Nardi had a distinguished career in the military. He is from Italy. He is now at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom. They're working on strategic communications, and part of his portfolio deals with the internet. And then finally, I'm delighted to welcome to the floor my colleague, Dr. Leslie Powell, who's the founding dean of the College of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Dr. Powell is one of the leading thinkers in the area of public policy, and specifically at Hamad bin Khalifa University, we're going to be working with some of the government agencies and international organizations in attempting to tackle some of the important problems that are pressing problems of today. So with that, we will now begin our panel discussion. Can everybody hear me okay with the microphone? Great, thank you. Thank you so much. In my introduction, I talked about the engagement specifically of you, Your Excellency, in the situation with the aftermath of the attack on the Qatar News Agency. And I would welcome your thoughts on what happened, what you found, the significance of this, or the significance of the subject overall to the state of Qatar. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I would like to reintroduce myself. My name is Saif Thani, Director of Communications. Of course, I'm honored to be here in this conference. Mr. Ali Sufan is a friend and brother for a long time, and the Sufan Center has done, I think, an incredible job with HBKU in organizing this conference. Now, there is really no point where to start in regards to the words you use, the reaction or fake news. But I would like to talk, before I answer your question, you know, instead of answering the A to Z, I would answer Z to A.
Okay.
In a way. Fake news has many consequences. Consequences that some of you have learned of. Cases, I don't want to specify any cases. Social media rumors that you know, turned into killings, into murder, and these are on a social and domestic and a community level. So imagine this happening on a scale country by country. In this case, 5 countries or 2 against 1. We you know, on that midnight, and I don't want to repeat this because I've repeated it over 1,000 times, but that midnight, we did not know to what extent things would go to. We did not even disinclude, you know, war, a full-out war. We did not know what was coming next to hit us. Now, in 2014, just to give you a comparison, there was a big brother, small brother relationship. In 2017, there was no big brother, small brother relationship in the GCC because of the changes in some of these countries, in one specific country. So we were dealing with people that we did not know how to react. At 12:13 a.m., I don't know why I was up, but I was still up. I remember being on the phone with the foreign minister 2 minutes prior to that. And I saw this small ticker in Al Arabiya of a statement from His Highness. So I called the news agency very normally and asked them, you know, because this usually gets run by me. So between 12:15 and 12:57, we determined that this was a hack and was not physically put. By then, we released a statement. I have sent it to both sides in what we thought the big brother country. And actually, the GCO statement, the government communication statement, was up on the Saudi news agency from 1:31 a.m. to 1:51 a.m. I received a message at 1:51 a.m. from someone high in the hierarchy who is still there today, who's more on the intelligence side, because they deal with media and intelligence in the same field, saying our apologies. This statement is clearly untrue. His Highness and the Prime Minister are, how do I say it, are bigger than what is said here. And we are not in the internal circle of what's going on. Give us till the morning to give you an answer. This was exactly the message. And some of the guys here, you know. So the impact of going back to your question, the impact is limitless. Talking socially, it is rumors, it is bullying. Talking on a scale of fake news country by country, you're talking limitless. And the dangerous part is one that fake news is collectively orchestrated by political and economical pressure to pressure a country. Sorry, I mean political and economical methods to pressure a country, and for reasons that we had hints here and there, but we did not expect to that extent things would go ahead with. So that would be my simple answer, and this is a complex issue. This is a complex subject, but there should be a regulation regarding, fabricated news. There are in some countries. We are working on one here. Yes, there are freedom of speech, but when fake news reaches to levels of whether, rumors in social media about a woman and that woman gets killed or for two countries to go into war, then there should be some sort of line. So that's my, it's a complicated answer that I understand, but it's difficult to explain to others.
Well, thank you for those important insights. This morning, the defense minister was asked about the capacity in Qatar to deal with the technological aspects of this phenomenon, and in particular, what is being done to make sure that there are individuals in the country who have the know-how to prevent as well as to investigate. My colleague at Hamad bin Khalifa University, Dr. Ahmed at QCRI, has extensively worked on this subject, and would you like to share specifically the actions and investigations that QCRI took and general results from the report?
Assalamu alaikum. So in QCRI, we have a department that specializes in social media analytics. And they work in various different aspects of topics within social media. We've developed some technologies that are useful in general in this realm of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, which is, I think the distinction there is important. I'll talk to in a second. We've developed a technology that identifies the stances of Twitter messages. For example, a system automatically identifies whether a Twitter message is hostile and so on and so forth, negative, positive, and this is using stance, so it's fairly deep and it's fairly accurate. And the accuracy there is very high. And the other thing is we've developed technology that automatically identifies whether an account is a propaganda account, account that is specifically created top-down to generate propaganda. And this is also with a very high accuracy. So using these technologies and other things that we have developed, we generally look at social media and do analysis. We are a research institute, and we always are curious to know. In going back to Susan's specific comment, like His Excellence had mentioned, in Al-Arabiya, it's curious that within minutes, within 18 minutes or so, the news appeared in Al-Arabiya and also in Saudi News 50. And there was a huge number of propaganda accounts that automatically came on board within 2 hours. So this could not be accidental. This is premeditated. In fact, more than 10% of the total active accounts were propaganda accounts. And we have a process of identifying, with distinguishing between a normal account that you and I would have and a propaganda account, the messaging and so on and so forth, and the way the messages are. And we detected almost 3,000 accounts that are propaganda accounts, mostly from the kingdom. In fact, exactly 2,777 accounts were up and running. The other comment that I want to make, the last comment that I want to make, is that this was not instantaneous. There was a lot of preparation for this. In fact, what we've done afterwards, and this is a retrospective, we pulled out the social media logs, and we looked at the social media logs, and actually there was some preparation for this starting in April. And say, for example, 2 weeks before the hack, there was 500x elevation in the number of these types of tweets. Anyway, so in general, to conclude, we developed a system called Saqr, and Saqr is a system that does social media analytics automatically. It's through a portal. And we also have a system now called Tanbih, which I will talk about later on, that works specifically on fake news. So these are two complementary systems that we developed at QCRI.
Thank you for that information, because the ability to go back in time fairly quickly after the incident and to determine the preparation that was involved, and then to study the dissemination, tells you a lot about the principal actors. You can also derive motives associated with it and the like. Mr. Nardi, you deal with communications, and particularly in the area of cyber, and you are now working at a very important foreign office in the United Kingdom. We've heard today and yesterday how the fact that each person can be a journalist, that we can all gather information, disseminate information quickly, and that the system is rapid. It's also deep, and it's volatile. Do you think that this aspect or these aspects are really the fundamental difference compared to perhaps what we had during the Vietnam War, when we had misstatements by the President of the United States in order to encourage the use of troops and things? Are we at a completely different time? Are there lessons we can learn, given your experience over the years, that could guide us through these difficulties?
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for your kind invitation here. The question is very related also to my working and professional experience, because I spent more than 36 years inside the military institutions, more than 10 years in the NATO organization, and 2 years in Afghanistan. So I would like to start this quick reflection on the matter related to disinformation means. I think that during the past centuries, not only during the last one, the informational domain has been always taken into account in all the political and military planning and conducting activities against an enemy. I want to mean that the domains of the warfare are four, principally: military, politically, economical, and informational one. And all the countries around the world, I'm looking now at the US intervention in Vietnam or in Korea, or during the Second World War, during the war in the Balkan countries, from the Russia during the Cold War, all these national or international organizations utilize the information domain for put in place their action to achieve a specific objectives. And inside the form of warfare, we have the supportive propaganda campaigns. We have still, and this is an important point, that is really taken into account during the planning of all the military activity, for instance. Now, I know that the term propaganda is not well accepted by some countries because you know better than me that during the Second World War, especially in Europe, we had the two fascist Nazi regimes that they got a specific ministry of propaganda. Also Russia got the same. And so after the Second World War, this term has become a bad term, but is still in place as a tool for reaching a specific objective. So I think that we have not to be surprised if we are managing, we are carrying out these kind of activities in terms of propaganda and counter-propaganda. If you're looking at the fake news, this is a term that has become part of our daily working names during the last years. But we have to be very careful when we are talking about fake news that we are refer only to the disinformation, not misinformation. Mm-hmm. Misinformation is something that involuntary someone put on the arena false information. We have to refer, and our work, daily work activities are referring at the disinformation activities. Mm-hmm. Now the situation is completely different because of the online disinformation propaganda. But we have not to forget that we have still the offline propaganda. In some countries in which we are doing strategic communication campaigns, we are almost all referring to offline propaganda. And the big difference is, coming back to your question, is that now is the speed of the spreading out this disinformation. And it put on our desk the very big difficulty of the analysis and producing a right assessment on what is true, what is false. Because one thing is that the disinformation put in place by countries in an official, let me say, an official way for reaching a specific goal. Otherwise, are the fake news put in place. For instance, yesterday we had about the fake news are related 80% to the sexual environment and pornographic matters and so on. And we have to refer and be very careful about these two different environments.
Yeah, I think that the distinction is looking at state-sponsored deliberate acts of false information with the intent to disrupt or to cause war. But then we also have this other level of information that is out there and people unwittingly sending around, yet that in itself can have consequences, as we learned yesterday in the conversation with regard to the Democratic Party activist or worker, Seth Rich, I believe his name was, and how people unwittingly took information and then potentially changed the political landscape in the United States. A lot of conversation we've had over the last day and a half has tried to address solutions. We heard already from Dr. Ahmed a bit about some technical solutions. I think a critical issue is, can we rely on states themselves, whether individually, in small groups, or collectively, to come up with a means to address this problem? Dean Powell, any thoughts on that topic?
I have a few. Thank you very much. One of the cardinal principles in trying to devise public policy responses to problems is to try to ensure that you've got a good definition of what that problem is. And I'm going to build on the previous comments and just try to disentangle different elements of what fake news might be or disinformation. And again, this picks up on some of the previous points, because if we're trying to think about responses either at the national level or globally, it's a response to what? If we misspecify the problem or define it too broadly, our responses are going to be miscalibrated. So again, building on my colleague's last comment, one form of I'll put it in quotation marks, disinformation is something that we would consider to be generally quite legitimate, and that's the strategic communication strategies of governments to try to sell their policies or their programs, or to take a particular initiative and put forward a particular view of that initiative. I'll only mention Brexit. For example, the current Prime Minister has taken a particular view of the likelihood of concluding a deal with the European Union. You may agree or disagree with that view, but it's perfectly legitimate for a Prime Minister and a government to put out a particular perspective. Now, governments can take it too far in the direction, as we heard, propaganda. And if that's the case, then our policy response would be quite different than if we were dealing with another kind of issue. So for instance, in that particular arena, we might be thinking about ensuring better transparency, some kind of particular watchdogs at the domestic level, to ensure that governments don't overuse their strategic capacities to oversell their policies. The second kind of problem that I think has been the preoccupation here, and certainly His Excellency highlighted this, is, and other speakers have pointed to this as well, and that's the deliberate disinformation or hoaxes that are made up to look like news. And this is an aspect of cyber war, cyber terror, and it's a very deliberate strategy in conflict by one state against another. And I won't belabor that point because many distinguished speakers yesterday and today are addressing that. But how we address that problem is quite distinct from from the previous one I mentioned. A third kind of problem that gets entangled in the notion of fake news is the simple biases that you see in the more established media. And these would be the news media, both print and non-print media. And again, this can become problematic, but it's been around for a very, very long time. Most of you are familiar with the case in, I think it was late 1800s, 1897, when Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, received a message from his photographer in Cuba saying that there's really nothing going on here to report. And Hearst responded in a telegram, "You supply the pictures and I'll supply the war." So the actions taken by media, whether it's CNN, or the biases reflected in media, whether it's CNN or Fox or the other mainstream media, is something that sometimes can amount to disinformation, but it is definitely a sort of bias. And if it gets exaggerated, then that can become a problem in terms of press regulation and the professionalism of journalism. Again, we heard that from an earlier speaker, and ensuring that the standards in the journalistic world, print and non-print, are maintained. Again, that's a very different kind of problem from active disinformation for cyber warfare, and a very different kind of problem than strategic communications by government. And the fourth one, again, that people have mentioned, is what I would call malinformation. It's not misinformation necessarily. That's not an attractive term, so forgive me, but this is simply the phenomenon of the spread of information and positions and points of view that may or may not be well-founded, that may be extremely biased, that may actually reject scientific evidence or claim other types of evidence in their favor. And this is the wider universe of social media. And here you have everything from neo-Nazis to anti-vaxxers to people pushing a particular perspective, religious or otherwise. And this is that component of cyberspace that is extremely difficult to regulate, which, again, people have touched on the various characteristics, moves very quickly, is prone to hysteria, moral panics, obviously disinformation. So those are four different ways in which we can think about the phenomenon of disinformation, fake news, biased communication, and the kinds of policy responses we're going to have are going to have to be different in each one of those areas. And my concluding comment is, of course, these are not separate realms. They all get entangled, so that if you're engaged in cyber warfare, you want to leverage your capacities, as we heard from our previous speakers, in social media, in the mainstream and non-stream communications media as well. So they are not separate areas, but they do require separate thinking and perhaps separate responses.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dean Powell. Your Excellency, you have an observation, and then I'll pass the baton after that to Carlo.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the issue of misinformation and fabrication. You cannot look at it as one meaning. Misinformation and fabrication in regards to opposite political parties is one thing. Between pro-Brexit and pro-Euro is one thing, and between the childish stuff that is happening between the two countries neighboring us and us. These are, you should look at misinformation and fabrication as categories also, and that's important to look at it and to justify it in that way. Because misinformation between political parties is accepted. I think it's been going on during elections for years, and it's some sort of norm in it. Pro-Brexit and pro-Euro is also something. But the misinformation and the fabrication to the extent of what happened to us and what happened to others is a much wider scale, because it reached a point of almost an all-out war. And it's important to note, whoever in this conference is analyzing this and categorizing this, whether it's HBKU, whether it's both you gentlemen, is to categorize misinformation into these separate categories: elections, convincing people to change a policy, and a sort of soft war between two countries. So that's my only comment, is to add to my colleague here, is it should also be categorized.
But the implications of just bad information that's out there, like we heard yesterday from Michael Isikoff, could be quite profound. A fake story is put on a website, picked up by a major news agency, and fundamentally or potentially transforms the perception of Hillary Clinton. Okay, so we have to look at the consequences, I think, and I think it gets back to something that Dr. Hasna talked about yesterday, and we've heard a couple of times, is education in this area, because the kind of distinctions that you're raising, that involves a high degree of focus and thinking about consequences.
If I can,
sure, absolutely.
See, I've been dealing with this issue since 2013. To be specific, since August 2013. It's a tricky job. It's not an easy job. I will give you an insight. Some of you might notice that we have released a statement on the 20th of May. I released it at 1 a.m. on the 20th of May of 2017, a day before the US summit. Mm-hmm. Now, why did I release it at that specific time? Because at 11:45 p.m., I got a call from a guy in Saudi who I don't know who's in jail or who still exists, who used to run the media show, saying that we are cutting off the media coordination between us. So that made me get the sense, and this is, I'm saying it publicly for the first time, gave me the sense that, okay, you telling me this at 11:45, 15 minutes before midnight, a day before the US summit, is a bit fishy. Mm-hmm. So I released a statement that we have been collecting, that we have noticed since February, or actually to be exact, since the day the Secretary of Defense, the US Secretary of Defense visited Qatar in, I think, March or end of February. Since that day until May, articles and op-eds came out about Qatar from people that are well known to us, and we have complained to both countries, but we kept calm. So that message made me release a statement. That statement is not targeted to the audience. It was targeted to the governments, US, European governments that will attend the US Riyadh summit on that day. Yeah, so, the complication of misinformation and fabrication should be categorized in different level, and should be looked at academically in different level, from political party campaigns to policy changes and convincing the public on policy changes, to what happened to us. I don't know how do you want to call our category, but to and this should also address small things like social media and the effects of bullying and rumors and I don't know if some of you have read, but some of these bullyings have reached to killings and deaths and murders and tribal problems. So just that's what I want to clear up.
That's great. Carlo, did you want to chime in, and then Ahmed?
Thank you. Going back to Leslie's assessment and also what Excellence just said, I would like to emphasize a specific point of the matter, and this is related to the different approach that the countries are putting in place against this matter related to the disinformation and fake news. And in specific, we have to look what the policy makers are approaching this question, this matter. For instance, they are becoming daily by daily more vulnerable because, let me say, it probably is not the right term, they are not well educated managing their presence on the several social platforms. Some countries, for instance, the Prime Minister, referring to our Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, put his own private account on the social media platforms, closing to his institutional one. So we got the personal one of the person, the institutional one of the person, the institutional one of the institution that he represents, and this complicated situation on the social platform can increase the vulnerability to attack the subject with disinformation and fake news. In other countries, for instance, we find only the account of the institution and no personal presence on the web, no institutional account of a single person. So it's more difficult to attack with disinformation and fake news those institutions. We have to take also this aspect into account. Because if on one side the presence on the web makes more consensus, on the other side increase the threat of fake news and disinformation.
Following up on that, and Ahmed, I know that you probably want to chime in, but one of the things, and just listening to all the conversations so far, you work in a world of computers and data. The kind of nuances that we're talking about here require what I would contend is a human perspective. How does your work effectively address the kind of distinctions that all the panelists are making, particularly the ones that we heard from His Excellency?
So there is a big distinction between traditional media at the beginning, at the very start, between traditional media and social media. Unfortunately, instead of converging on more formalized, the traditional media is starting to act more like social media. So it's becoming very difficult or more difficult to distinguish, for example, between Fox and CNN when they're both are going after likes and followers and so on and so forth. So there is just to go back very quickly to the point that was discussed by the three other panelists, I believe we really need to be very specific in defining the term fake news is not good enough. It's too broad. we have to be very careful in defining disinformation, malinformation, and fake news, and focus on things that have been weaponized. Like His Excellency, like Les and Carlo had mentioned, just simply misstating a fact by itself in not so significant setting is different. And so now, let me spend 30 seconds, and I'll try to give examples. What is the main characteristic of social media? And we can use Twitter, we can use Facebook, but I'll pick on Facebook since everybody's picking on Facebook today. Sorry. So one thing is, there is an extreme personalization in social media. So that, let me give you an example. Cambridge Analytica received 87 million accounts of American users. Not only that, but they had access to extremely personalized information. So demographic information, personality, psychological profiles, all the information. Now, if you have that, then you have such a power to personalize the news, specifically to target the news based on what the specific audience or a specific user would want. Now, 87 million may not seem a lot, but it's a huge, considering the fact that the US elections were won by a difference of 80,000 or so votes in 3 states. So 87 million is a huge amount. And there are many examples of these types of things. So for example, Netflix, Spotify is another media, and so on, received personal information from Facebook, private messages with rights to read, write, and delete, and so on and so forth. Microsoft, Sony, and Amazon received, again from Facebook, email addresses of users' friends. So now the concept of friends, which scares me. From the very beginning, I was an early adopter of Facebook, and then I'm totally out of it because of the fact that this concept of friends, and it gives you total lack of privacy in many more ways than you know. And so on and so forth, giving Apple and other device users the ability to do plugins to features and so on and so forth. So there are all kinds of examples. So the first one is personalization. The other distinction is magnification. Social media gives us the ability to magnify so quickly, so cheaply. If you wanted to reach millions of users using traditional communication, you need to spend a lot of money and you have to have a big apparatus. Now, for a few $100s or less, you can reach millions of users. So this is another thing. And by the way, 70% of the users can't recognize fake news from regular news. In fact, I want to come back to this point. Finland has done a great job in doing educational training campaigns. For example, reverse image search. A lot of times, like yesterday, there were many of the speakers were showing an image that, in fact, the speaker is right here, was showing, was discussing this image that seemed as if it was from one event, where in fact it was from another time and another event. Imagine if you trained the children or office work and everybody on how to take an image, plug it into Google, and do reverse search on image, using image. And it's available, and it's very easy to do. So we need to be very aware of magnification. The third one is echo chambers. One problem with as a result of personalization is that you create these sort of narrow fields, these echo chambers, and you create alternative realities, alternative universes, not alternative facts. but alternative universes. And a lot of the alt-right live in an alternate universe. Otherwise, a logical person couldn't believe some of the stuff that goes around in alt-right groups, right? But you become so narrow, tunneled, you have such a tunnel vision that you live in an alternate universe that things that are total, you know, crazy things become real. The other thing is, there is with social media, there is an extreme engagement. By the way, I believe the only way to fix this is to change the business model. Right now, companies like Facebook make money on fake news. Whether they mean it or not, that's not my point. The point is user engagement. You basically you want to share information much quicker. It takes 10 minutes for fake news to spread, for you know, to become viral. Traditional ways of verifying social media, it wouldn't work. So if you wanted to verify the news itself, the piece of information itself, it would take you more than that. So that is why, for example, in 10B, one of the things that we focused on is verifying the source of the information. So, you know, there are many things that make social media, it's a different ball game. We need to be serious about starting an education campaign in schools, in workplaces, and so on in societies, to sort of make the user a part of the defense system and not rely on
the source.
Yeah.
Not trying to deal with the source. Your Excellency?
Just a few comments in regards to a few what His Excellency talked about. First of all, Education City was built with its variety of universities, and HBKU was built with its variety of colleges to make sure that there's an educated public, both Qataris and social. So I do not need an echo chamber to echo or whatever a message. I think people have their own filters in their heads. I depend on these filters, whether they completed their education or not. Echo chambers are done in countries that are third world, or countries that do not have the beneficiary of having a state-of-the-art education system. And that's wrong, I believe. Taking advantage of people and sort of guiding their opinion. But I do believe in taking the analysis to focus on the target audience. Yes, that I do believe in. Now, that's one of my biggest differences with when someone speaks to me of an echo chamber. I do not need an echo chamber. The UAE does need an echo chamber. Saudi Arabia does need an echo chamber because they have 30 million people to deal with. But I do not need. His Highness took a decision. His Highness the Emir father 15 years ago took a decision and opened these universities. The same year we opened our universities, the UAE opened their universities. In the last 5 years, the UAE has been closing down their universities because they've seen that these students that are graduating are voicing their opinion, and they do not want to, create a platform for them, where we are expanding the platform for them. So I do not need an echo chamber. My line I would say, my red line would be in social media is my religion, is hate speech, is my culture. The same way I respect other people's culture when I go and travel, when I go and to a conference abroad, for health reasons, whatever reasons, respecting, creating an ethics code of social media, for social media would be a better approach than creating a echo chamber where I know that everyone in his head has his own filter. So, that's something I believe in and refuse to do, and His Highness refused to do, because we believe in people should make their own decisions. If you want to believe what you want to believe, then so be it. If you want to know the truth, then this is the truth.
Very well said. I would say right in response to that, but that would be an echo chamber. So I want to be careful. You touched on a number of issues that came up over the course of the last day, and that is the need for a robust exchange of ideas consistent in the United States with the First Amendment, and then the challenges associated with that, and the assumption that individuals can make the kind of discerning analysis that you just, go ahead, yeah.
One more example. This is a true example between us and the UAE. A student who I'd rather not name was doing either her PhD, I think it was her PhD, in Georgetown and Doha. And she was flying from, and at the time this was 2017, early 2017. At the time I was also, on behalf of the director of the GCO, I was acting chief of staff to the Prime Minister. And I get a very late phone call from the UAE asking me not to allow this woman to come in. She's flying through Etihad, transiting through Abu Dhabi, coming to Doha. So I told them, on what basis? So they base it on this mechanism of GCC security, where we have to do what they say, and it's national security and all of this. It made me curious who this woman is. So I did just a background check. I realized she was a PhD student doing her PhD on the migration from east to west of workers, GCC being a transit hub for a few years, but their aim is Europe and the US, as I understand. And it was 1 a.m. I couldn't wake up the Prime Minister, but I refused the request because it did not seem to me as a national security thing. And it upsetted them. And I told them, if you want to stop her and send her back. And they did exactly that. She came into transit. They sent her back to DC. She took a Qatar Airways flight and came back to Doha. This was one of the reasons why they got upset. She wrote an article. I never met her, but she did write an article in September or October of 2017. It wasn't a very positive article about Qatar, but it was a very negative article about the UAE. So just to show you how we're not seeing eye to eye, are on stuff like these.
Right. Yeah. Well, these examples are perfect because I think they get back to something we heard from the Minister of Singapore yesterday, where they are basically, they have a law that's like, take it down. You have time to take it down. What we've seen is that the companies themselves, and we'll continue with the Facebook, that Facebook is sort of saying, take it down, and they're doing it on their own terms and the like. So instead of, we may have a nation state being the watchdog, but we're also relegating a lot of this space to the private sector. Dean Powell, do you have some concerns about that, about how we're going to address this problem if we transfer a lot of the regulatory space to the private sector?
It is astonishing how effectively companies like Facebook and Twitter have now assumed many of the functions that previously would have been considered normal for the nation state or a government in terms of information regulation. I read recently that Facebook has, this might be somewhat dated, something like 10,000 employees whose only job it is to monitor content and review it in terms of its regulatory standards about speech. And that's all laudable, and I think Twitter, the CEO of Twitter, is genuinely concerned to create a space that is open for dialogue and not entirely an echo chamber. I think there are two problems with that. One is the sheer size and scope of cyberspace or the information space in which we're operating. I checked this last night. This is not fake news. You can Google it. There are 500 million tweets per day. 500 million tweets per day. And we heard from Dr. Ahmed, maybe there are mechanisms and technological means for checking and reviewing and assessing and regulating, but that just seems like an awful lot of tweets. And I think the sheer capacity of private sector and frankly even governments to try to regulate that amount of communication is, that's just Twitter, it's just tweets. We're not talking about everything else that goes on, I think is going to be problematic. The second issue or the second problem with leaving much of this up to the private sector, and again, people have touched on this and previous speakers, the business models of these companies are designed to maximize attention and indeed to exacerbate echo chambers, the kind of viral communication that we heard about. There are different terms for this. There have been some books written on the attention economy. Another somewhat more, another perspective is surveillance capitalism. So there's a lot of theoretical work going on out there and practical work in the economics and social policy fields, public policy fields, indicating that we're into a completely different kind of phase of economy. And trying to regulate and to clamp down on some of the worst aspects of this may actually run against the grain of the way these corporations operate.
Do you think along those lines that, particularly in situations where we have evidence of state-sponsored misinformation, that we should think of a mechanism whereby a neutral body could adjudicate the matter and make some sort of finding with regard to liability, with regard to harm, with regard to potentially even like injunctive actions?
Well, to address the question of companies, whether it's Cambridge Analytica or IQ or one of these that some of which I've sat with and discussed with, and I have not seen fit to be our style. And just if you can repeat your last part of the question.
Just in terms of, is there, maybe it's more a question of political will, is there a sufficient
A mechanism.
momentum to have some type of international dispute body to address, let's talk about the extreme state-sponsored.
Well, see, in every field, there has to be a disruption, a damage that is big enough for the international community to address. You know, these companies at the beginning of the crisis used to pay $300 per tweet to write bad about us. This Twitter user, even though things go down, he will write, so he continue to get his $300 for each tweet. And a lot of them became millionaires because of this. So I remember one of the protests outside DC, the first protest outside DC. There was a number of protesters, and I was there. It was the early stages. And I told Jasim, who was our media attaché, I told him, go out and give them water, and you guys will either be hit and will know that this is real, or will know this is fake. They took the water bottles, they took the cakes, they laughed, we talked, we took pictures, they left. So, you know, and just to be honest with you, we did that in another country and we were beaten up. So it's you know, it was for a different cause. But what I'm saying is, for a mechanism to happen, there need to be a pause. You know, and just as a funny example, you know, if you have a carpet at home, you need to take it outside every once in a while and dust it up.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, what I would propose is for us to dust up ourselves, take that period of time, search for a mechanism that would control the situation as best as possible. And by now, to me, social media, most people know what's fake and what's not. They have the correct filters, you know, that would allow them to do so. And you know, let's not assume that the public is you know, sorry for the word, unaware or living in a different reality. They know what's going on. We know what's going on. Let's not lie to ourselves, you know, and at least fix the media problem. I always have a calm approach, and this approach did not come from me, it from His Highness. I remember His Highness on the 24th sent me a text at 3:15 a.m. Told me, Saif, what's happening? What did you do? What did you do as a reaction? I told him this is a statement. He said that's enough. We'll go back to sleep. We meet tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. That message calmed me down, calmed everyone down. And this was by His Highness. You know, I hope that the leaders in the GCC from these two countries, from these three countries, are as well, you know, have the calmness His Highness has. And, you know, hopefully this mechanism, if it happens, it will happen once it reaches a peak. And I don't know when this peak will reach.
Right. Well, words of optimism in terms of human nature, I think, as to the ability of people to respond in difficult situations. You know, when you were giving the protest, it reminds me of when President Obama would have a protester at one of his rallies, he would say, "Hi, how are you? Welcome to the conversation." And that type of approach, I think, is important. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I'm watching the clock here. We have 3.5 minutes. I just want to make one quick fact statement that I thought was interesting, getting back to our friend Facebook. I went and picking up on a theme we heard a few minutes ago, that on its website, Facebook says it recognizes that, quote, most false news is financially motivated. So there are actors out there who, getting back to your $300 a tweet, who are engaged in this at a level, and trying to control that will be, I think, a challenge. So it gets back again to the source. But for each of our panelists, I would just like to end the conversation with just one question. And mind you, this is not a question I sent to them in advance. We had a conversation about the topics we would cover, and then made some adjustments in light of the rich conversation we've had in the last day and a half. But if there's one thing that you would recommend that could be done to address the problem of the war of words, what would that be? If you can make one recommendation, what would that be? Anybody? Anyone wants to start? Yeah, and we'll finish with His Excellency.
Okay, I can start and be brief. The other weekend, I went to the Qatar National Library on Sunday, very early. I was doing some work there, and it's remarkable, the families and the young children that are there in this magnificent facility at Education City. This is not perhaps so fashionable or maybe on everybody's radar, but I would really put resources into libraries where the population can go, where young children in particular can learn about an exposure to knowledge and approaches to thoughts and ideas that are outside of the social media bubble, and learn to appreciate truth and knowledge that way.
On my side, I think that we have to increase, we are in the right moment to increase the international collaboration on this matter, especially regarding the education. We are not so happy when we are looking at the users of the social media platforms, but to the institutions, to the media, especially the media. The United Kingdom is carrying out a big project for, let me say, educated the media approaching this threat. And we have to continue on this pathway and increase the collaboration between the countries. The European Union Commission starting to do this kind of work, and we can see already some specific countries that are doing something on this field. Thank you.
Very quickly, I think a big problem that we still have, and there is a lot of work going on in the College of Science and Engineering at Hamad bin Khalifa University on attribution. That is, it's a big problem in security, but also it appears here. How you attribute an activity to a particular entity. And forensics. So you need a lot of forensics in order to achieve this. So I think these two things, and people are in HBKU are actively working on it. I think this is an area where some progress is needed.
Okay.
I mean, the topic is large, so I will advise in one field that is becoming bigger and bigger. And that is linking media to intelligence work. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we are seeing abroad, the GCC, the 3 countries, and abroad in North Africa and beyond. Linking media activities to the intelligence community is an issue, and you know, and we're moving to the past instead of the present. Yeah. So these two should not be linked in any government, mm-hmm. and utilized in a way that is dangerous for the population of that country and the world itself. So I would say my focus would be that.
Great. Thank you. On that note, I would like to thank all the panelists and thank the audience for your engagement this morning. And also, in my introductory remarks, I didn't have the chance to thank the amazing work that has been done in organizing this conference, and particularly the work of the Sofan Center. We've enjoyed working with them and my colleagues as well at Hamad bin Khalifa University. So thank you very much.